I am in Ouray, Colorado at the Bachelor Syracuse Mine, a former silver mine that is now open for tours. I don't think I've ever been in a real mine before, so I'm excited for this. There's some antique machinery out front. Here's a global directions signpost. Here's a wood-carved miner head. This is the gift shop. These are Tommy knockers, little mine spirits or mine trolls that the Cornish immigrant workers believed watched over the mines. And there's a map of the mine complex. There are more levels than the one I'm going in. That is good advice, even though abandoned mines are really cool. Gotta wear a hard hat in the mine. This big air compressor provided ventilation for the mine, pumping fresh oxygen into the dank and musty mine shafts. It was powered by hydroelectricity. The world's first long-distance hydroelectric generating plant was relatively nearby at Telluride. I also like that antique Conoco sign. The mine was first started in 1884. There were lots of gold and silver veins around Ouray, here in the San Juan Mountains, so plenty of mines were developed during that time, the largest and most profitable being the Camp Bird mine.
And what they found was a vein that was 4 feet wide by 500 feet deep. It was some of the best silver this area has ever seen.
The original Bachelor mine here that dug into Gold Hill Mountain was among the most successful in Ouray. The silver vein here in Gold Hill was located by 3 men, a surveyor, a speculator, and a prospector, and it worked out quite nicely for them. And this is the entrance to the Bachelor Syracuse Mine. They made about $250,000 each during the early years, which would be about $4 million each today, and that was despite the silver crash of 1893 when silver values plummeted. They were regularly rolling out chunks of ore worth between $200 and $500 down this mountain and to the railroad tracks for pickup. The older parts of the Bachelor mining operation here are only reachable because of this tunnel that I'm currently walking in, which was blown out in the 1920s. This is called the Syracuse Tunnel in honor of the investors who financed this from Syracuse, New York, in an attempt to get more out of this mine.
This is what happens when you decide to leave a shower on for about 100 years. Got a big old buildup of calcite on the wall. Now that water dripping down up there, now the reason for that is because it's coming down through Dakota sandstone, which is like a giant Brita filter above us. Now, people in the 1920s, when they came up here, they swore that these waters had healing properties to them. And, well, it is traveled by hooch. They just had to have a good excuse. Now, of course, well, they couldn't drink downtown during that time, but they were willing to turn a blind eye to the drinking of the workers up in the mining houses. And the reason was simple. You couldn't get a miner to come and work for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week without a little something waiting on them when they got home. Now these lower ceilings are black powder. These higher ceilings are dynamite. You usually use black powder in areas that didn't have any value. You didn't want to waste a good explosive on something that wasn't going to make you money. Now this here is the last bit of wood in here. Most people associate mines with coal mines. In a coal mine, every 10 feet you got to put timber up. Now these pieces of wood up in the wall are known as messengers. And a messenger served several purposes during the construction phase, but they were primarily for the intent that they needed to measure how deep into the mountain they were, and there's not really any measuring tools that can go a whole mile back. So what they did instead was they put one up per shift. Each shift went approximately 6 to 7 feet. So they would just round to 7. They'd times them out after they counted them, and they'd get their rough estimation of how deep it. Well, you wouldn't know until it was too late. Now this, they wouldn't have seen this back then. This took about 100 years to develop. And, well, these are just like in caves. Same formations, just in a much younger stage. So this is known as bacon. These little prickly parts are known as popcorn. And when I get toddlers in here, I tell them to come back in about 70 years, they can see 1/4 of an inch of growth. It's going to take a long time for those things to able to overcompensate for something. Well, this is a 1 degree angle, pretty placid and calm. And then once we get about halfway, we'll start walking towards an area that has a 2-degree angle. You'll know it because you'll start to see the water move pretty fast. You'll also start to hear the water. It's usually the area where most people realize they should have gone to the bathroom before they came in. Now the reason you see calcite in some areas but not others is really just pressure in the rock. If you got tighter pressure, the water can't come through. If you have less tight pressure, the water does.
I'm about at the halfway point.
And I can also tell you that that's almost the exact same above us. We are about 800 feet right now beneath the ground.
Wow.
Beyond this point, the temperature remains pretty stable. They had drilled too close to an internal lake in the mountain, and it was starting to seep through the walls. And as such, they were having to use electric pumps to pull all that water up. Well, that was costing a pretty penny to pump it all the way to the top of the mountain. So after this tunnel was completed, they said, no, cut off the power, dam up the water, and start drilling down. And that's just what they did. Well, that water started to build up quite a bit. And by the time they finally completed this level, they realized, well, they were going to have to release that water very carefully. And so they warned everybody down here to prepare. He's in here into the 1940s. Watch your step here. And those donkeys, well, they were well known by all the men, specifically one in here. His name was Champ. Champ was really good at his job. He knew the right amount of carts to hook up, so you'd hear the clinks. And if there was too many carts hooked up, well, he would stop. He would refuse to move. And when you came to lead him out, he'd bite you in the shoulder. So their favorite thing to do to a new guy was to tell him the tram guy's got to take a break, but we got to get these carts out. They'd always make sure there was an extra cart hooked up. And when he went to go lead him out, he'd get bit in the shoulder. They'd have a good laugh. Now this here is one of our more heavily calcified areas.
Yeah.
And just like if you were to look up in cloud, and this is a very slow buildup of a stalagmite. It'll take quite a while for that to build up. When you get parents in here that are a little uncaring about their toddler being kind of rude, this becomes baby shark, mama shark. Bits of food scratching on the ear. Well, those donkeys started to associate the men with food. And as such, well, they started to become like a mafia. You had to pay for protection. They'd see men coming down the shaft, you know, you always went with a big group because you only wanted to have one guy to have to pay the toll, because the donkey would see him and stop and turn sideways with the intent being either you give me something or you get bit or kicked. So they always made sure to have something to pay the donkey's toll.
So I have walked about 1,500 feet into the side of Gold Hill Mountain, where the mine tunnel comes to an end. There's a tableau here with some artifacts for demonstration. There's also this miner mannequin on a stretcher. And that's a classic horizontal drill.
Consisted of putting the rod up against the wall, hitting it once, and turning a quarter turn. The quarter turn was what kept it loose in the wall. Of course, if he didn't do that, he was just going to start hammering away at this thing until it was going to get stuck, and he wouldn't be able to pull it out. Up and using only his wrist touch his nose. If he could do that, he was ready to be on the double jack tunnel. That was a lie. What that was designed to do was to get him to drop it on his nose, and then they'd have a good laugh. There, he would do the quarter turn for him. Pretty simple job, except they weren't doing this in the lighting conditions that we have. They were doing this primarily by candlelight. It was too dangerous to bring an oil lantern in here for fear of an oil fire. And they would have had carbide lanterns later on in the 1900s, but early on those didn't exist. It's a lot harder to see in here now.
Yeah, no kidding.
In fact, to make sure that guy was going to consistently hit that tip every time, you'd usually crush up some calcium carbonate and rub it on the tip in a powder form like a chalk. That way they had illumination there to see at. They're more mischievous than anything, but they'd help you. The coal miners who'd seen a lot of death and injury, they saw them as an evil presence. And those knocking noises weren't them warning you, but actually swinging sledgehammers at the wood to collapse the mine on you. Now the other one was if they blew your candles out. Now some men believed that blowing the candles out was them warning you of low oxygen so that you could get out in time. Whereas the other men believed there was low oxygen and they blew out your candles so that you couldn't find your way out and you'd die of suffocation. Either way, it was good knowledge to know if those events happened, you should get out of that area immediately. Well, all the men, if you were working with a man next to you, you'd grab onto his shoulder, you'd find the other, so usually a crew of 5, you'd find the other men, they'd all link up, The first man in front would use his double jack to tap the ground until he found the rail. They'd get to the rail, they'd all put their foot on one part of the rail and drag that foot as they walked, with the other men holding them while the other guy tapped as they went along. Because there's ventilation shafts that go hundreds of feet up and down. You do not want to fall into one of those. So I give you an idea of what that darkness was like to these guys. Now, an interesting thing about dynamite is that you know the guy who did it, you just didn't know you knew the guy who made this. So he was a Swedish chemist, and he was trying to find a solution to the problem of black powder. About 150 to 200 feet back. And then they would walk out at the end of the day. Jackhammers are more for downward drilling. Now, as such, well, they brought these primarily in at the 8 feet of the wall beyond the other wall, and they determined there wasn't enough in there to make any money off of when they moved on. And all the other immigrant groups in the area wanted them so badly, but the problem was these were usually passed down from father to father. And as such, well, you were not going to get these out of the hands of one of these men. This was an heirloom to them. They're pretty excited about it because they hadn't seen this much silver since level 6, and they thought there was going to be a whole bunch more in here. Well, this is 3 days worth of drilling.
Now it's time to make the trek all the way back.
In the hotels downtown, sometimes they would say that they were going to have like a big poker competition that winter, and they were going to bring some famous poker player up to play. Or they would say that, you know, well, in one year they said they were going to bring a French chef up to cook for the men. And of course that got a lot of men excited, thinking, hey, I want to be. They just showed up one season and was like, this is a beautiful area.
Yeah.
And they set up their town, and then the Native Americans came back in the spring, they're going, who are you? Why are you here? And they said, well, we found this is ours. And
I believe they used to take visitors on a little train on this track through the mine, which would have been fun. I don't know when they stopped doing that, but walking it is a good way to take everything in. And I have survived the mine. So this was a really interesting experience, and thanks to the tour guide, he did a great job. The Bachelor Syracuse is a great Colorado mine tour. I'd recommend it. If you enjoyed this video, then please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Also take a look at my other videos featuring roadside attractions, museums, national parks, caves, and more here in Colorado and across the country. Thanks for watching.